Hello and welcome to the annual Starmen Spooktacular Ghost Stories of 2024. This year we will be reading stories as usual that we've found all over the internet just for you guys. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories we found for you. Hello everyone, I'm Devin. I'll be reading off my story for this year's 2024 Halloween Ghost Stories. My story is from Wattpad.com by Evening Lurker, called Thousands. You crawl into bed around 9. Funny, that's a little early for you, but you don't seem to care. You toss and turn for a few minutes before you feel it. Somebody's watching you. You're sure of it. You scan the room, finding nothing, but you still feel uneasy. You lay back down, facing the room. You shut your eyes and try to sleep, but you can't. You still feel the eyes on you, watching you. You pull the covers over your head, and the feeling fades. You relax and close your eyes, but as soon as they shut, the feeling returns. You're scared to move the covers, to search for the eyes that you know are watching you. You're terrified, but you yank the covers down, and as you do, your heart skips a beat. You scan the room, seeing absolutely nothing yet again. The feeling disappears, and you scold yourself for acting like such a child. You roll towards the wall and quickly fall into a peaceful sleep. But let me ask you this. Do you know how many hiding places there are in your room? I do. Thousands.
Hey, I'm Billy, and my story is from Ghost Stories and Legends of Prince Edward Island by Julie V. Watson. And the story is Little Pond. The following account was taken from Those Were the Days, a history of the north side of the Mountain River. Many years ago, a man from Little Pond went shooting. He built a blind out of seaweed, sticks, and bushes. The ducks would come in so far then fly out again before he could get a shot at them, so he knew something was scaring them away. He decided to investigate and raised his head to peer over the blind. A huge snake-like head poked out of the weeds around the shore. He aimed and fired quickly at it. And the monster's head and killed it. However, the apparition began to thrash about in its last agony, and the man realized how large the creature really was. He immediately took flight, dropped his gun, and raced to nearby neighbors. The neighbors could barely understand what had happened, since he was almost incoherent with fright. They accompanied him back to find the carcass and discovered it was 14 feet long. They attached a wire to it, pulled it up. It was estimated to weigh close to 300 pounds. It was felt that this monster must have come from the sea.
Hello, this ghost story is Cemetery Night to Remember. This is from www.yourghoststories.com, and it's by Dev19. A couple of years ago, on a cool autumn night, I had an unforgettable experience that will stay with me forever. It all started when a group of friends and I decided to visit the local cemetery after hours. Rumors had been circulating that the cemetery was haunted, and we were curious to see for ourselves if there was any truth to the stories. I was with a couple of friends in one car while another friend drove a separate vehicle. As we made our way through the dark and winding roads leading to the cemetery, we could feel a sense of unease creep over us. The night was still and eerily quiet, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the wind. As we pulled up to the gates of the cemetery, I could feel my heart racing in anticipation. The gates were locked, but that didn't stop us. We parked our cars outside and decided to explore on foot. The moon cast an eerie glow over the gravestones, creating long shadows that seemed to dance in the darkness. We walked among the tombstones, reading the names and dates etched into the cold stone. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, as if we were not alone in the cemetery. Suddenly, my friend who was driving the other car let out a gasp and pointed ahead. We all turned to look, and that's when we saw it. A small figure darting across the road in front of the truck. We were all frozen in place, trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. I felt a chill run down my spine, my arms covered in goosebumps. We quickly got back into our cars as we followed the others out of the cemetery. As we drove down the dark road, my friend in the other car suddenly slammed on the brakes. We pulled up beside them and rolled down the window, asking what had happened. They explained that they had heard a loud bang on the back of their car, as if something had hit it. We all got out of our cars to inspect the damage. To our horror, we found a small handprint smeared across the back of the car, as if a child had touched it. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. The figure we had seen running across the road was not a figment of our imagination. It was real. Fear gripped us as we stood in the darkness, unsure of what to do next. We could feel a presence watching us, a sense of malevolence that sent shivers down our spines. Without a word, we all got back in our cars and drove from the cemetery as quickly as we could. To this day, I still cannot explain what we saw that night. Was it the spirit of a restless soul haunting the cemetery? Or something more sinister? Whatever it was, it left an indelible mark on me and my friends. We never spoke of that night again, too afraid to relive the terror that had gripped us in the darkness of the cemetery. But the memory of that unforgettable night will always stay with me. A chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead.
Hello, I'm David. My horror story will be The Old Man in the Well by Hotblooded1988 from Reddit. Keith was 12 the first time the old man in the well spoke to him. Keith was out playing after dark on the family's small farm near the well. The old well had beams supporting a rope and pulley with a bucket attached, even though Keith was told that well ran dry before he was born. Suddenly, he heard someone say his name in a slow, raspy voice. Keith whirled around and saw no one. A look of confusion spread across his face as he heard it again. Keith. This time, it was said with more force and a bit louder. The voice sounded like one of the old farmers who liked to smoke, thought Keith. Looking down the well, Keith heard the same voice asking, "Have you got anything tasty?" Keith couldn't see anything past the first 12 or so feet down the well, even though it was a full moon. "Who are you? How'd you get down there?" Keith asked. "If you give me something tasty, I'll reward you," replied the voice. All Keith had were some cookies he had stuffed in his pocket as he left to play. He put those in the bucket and it lowered it. He lowered it nearly 40 feet and was literally at the end of his rope when he no longer felt the weight of the bucket on the rope. 20 seconds passed and he felt the weight of the bucket again. He began to pull the bucket up. As he finished pulling the bucket up to the top, he heard the voice say, "No, nice." Keith saw a reflection in the bucket and saw a rectangular piece of silver metal, about the size of an army dog tag. It was completely flat and smooth. "Want fresh," the voice said. Even though Keith tried to talk to the old man again, there was no response. Keith made up a story about where he found the metal and took it to his father, who took it into town and confirmed it was an ounce of pure silver. After that, Keith kept it a secret. It took a while to discover that the old man was only there the night of full moons. Keith quickly learned that only live things he put in the well would be rewarded, but only once for each item, and once every full moon. So one of each kind of animal was lured down the well and rewarded. Keith now had a cigar box, mostly full of silver pieces by the time he was 16, but it ran out of different animals to get rewarded for. It was around this time the local farmhand went missing. It was also the same time that Keith was rewarded with gold pieces for the first time. Once Keith took over the farm, temp workers seemed to vanish every now and then without explanation from the farm. The old man had finally found something tasty enough to always reward.
This is Curtis, and I'm reading The Moon Gazes Down and Weeps, submitted to bogleech.com by Emergence. There was a clear sky that night. I was on my balcony with my telescope admiring the intricate pattern of craters on the full moon's surface. I've always been fascinated by astronomy ever since I was little. The smallest craters to the largest Maria all had stories to tell me about the moon's past. I looked at the moon so much that its surface was more familiar to me than anywhere on Earth. That night, I noticed fissures on the moon that weren't there before. They were subtle at first. You wouldn't have been able to see them without a telescope as powerful as mine. The fissures were radiating out from a region between the Sea of Vapors and the Sea of Clouds, close to dead center on the near side of the moon. Over the next hour, the fissures started growing and spreading over the moon's surface. A strangely symmetrical pattern of ramifying cracks formed, and a roughly circular region in the center of the moon looked like a smashed pane of glass. I couldn't be the only one who noticed. I could already faintly see the cracks without my telescope. I checked the news. They had hastily arranged interviews with some astronomers and geologists. Their best guess was some sort of seismic activity, but they didn't know what was causing it or why the cracks were arranged the way that they were. I went back out to my telescope to get a better look at the cracks. That's when I noticed what was seeping out of them. A pitch-black fluid was rising out of the deepest of the cracks. The more fluid seeped out, the wider the cracks became. Eventually, the remaining chunks of the moon's surface in the central circular region collapsed entirely, leaving a field of tarry blackness surrounded by jagged, branching veins. A sickly-colored, iridescent stain spread out from the borders of the dark sea. Bone-white barnacles, like shapes of varying sizes, began to rise from the surface of the lake, some so small that I could only faintly see them through the telescope, others so large they had to be the size of small countries. Dark, gray, rubbery, wormy tendrils spread from the base of the barnacles, forming a tangled web of roots weaving over and under the lake's surface. Each barnacle had a huge eye recessed in a pit in its center, the white sclera covered in black veins branching out from the huge pupils. I stared transfixed at the moon for a while, too shocked to look away as the moon stared back. The surface of the tendrils began undulating, as if they were in peristalsis, and as I turned my gaze to the eyes, I noticed tears welling up in them. The tears weren't coming from any tear ducts. They were oozing out of the veins and pupils of the eyes. Droplets rose from the surface of the welling tears like wax in a lava lamp, dripping upwards, away from the moon's surface. The teardrops were somewhat more translucent than the black fluid in the lake, like globes of dark seawater, with a slight sheen on their surface. I could see the silhouettes of various slithering, scuttling things swimming just below the surface of the tears as they drifted further from the moon. As I walked back inside, trembling, some scientists and reporters on a live news feed were explaining what I had just seen firsthand, trying to keep their composure. I just switched off the TV and went to bed. I didn't get much sleep that night. I checked the news again the next morning. The tears were moving towards the Earth. Based on their speed, they'd be here in 3 days.
Hello again, dear listeners. It's your friend Davin, giving you a surprise second story to finish off these ghost stories for 2024. My second story also comes from Wattpad, again by Evening Lurker. The story is called Wristbands. When you are admitted to a hospital, they place you on your wrist a white wristband with your name on it. But there are other different color wristbands which symbolize other things. The red wristbands are placed on dead people. There was one surgeon who worked one night shift in a school hospital. He had just finished an operation and was on his way down to the basement. He entered the elevator, and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. When the elevator door opened, another woman was about to enter when the doctor slammed the close button and punched the button to the highest floor. Surprised, the woman reprimanded the doctor for being rude and asked why he did not let the other woman in. The doctor said, "That was the woman I just operated on. She died while I was doing the operation. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman smiled and raised her arm and said, "Something like this." And that concludes this year's ghost stories. So, did any of them send chills down your spine, leave you unable to sleep, or perhaps even question your own reality? Until next time, dear viewers, have a good one.